これはこれは彼らの祝福であり、私のコアシークレットキーでもあるんだよ。
Right, so I just got this and we'll talk about it. So basically, this is just an update on my 1500 day video, but now I'm at like 2000 days or something? Yeah, that's close enough. But before that, this video is brought to you by Snowbreak Containment Zone, previously known as Project Snow from Season Games. This is a free-to-play 3D game that innovates on the third-person shooter genre by incorporating character switching and quick-time events into its core gameplay. Players enter the battle with 3 characters, each having their preferred weapon and their own unique abilities against enemies across highly varied environments. Thank you Season Games for sponsoring this video. So, Honkai Impact 3 was launched in 2017 and has been running for more than 5 years as of the end of Part 1. Now, I'm actually not a day 1 player since the Southeast Asian servers opened back in November 1. And actually, I also played Guns Girl back in 2016, so I'm familiar with the characters. Okay, so back to this. For the pre-registration rewards, they gave out a badge, this sword, and this Stigmata set. The server initially started with only the S ranks for the trio, and Blood Rose came one patch after with the introduction of the Xuan Yuan and Chio event that lasted for 3 months. This one takes the top spot for the grindiest event to ever exist since we had to spend almost 10,000 stamina to unlock the event emblem. Infinity Abyss back then had 30 floors in total, and the Valkyries bleed at a certain rate. And instead of disturbance, we had temperature levels which dictate how fast the bleeding rate is, so healers like Divine Prayer and Stigmata that reduce indirect damage were valuable. The ranks were based on the highest floor cleared, but the thing is, we had items and traps that can reduce someone's progress by 1 to 4 floors. Later on, the Abyss got reduced to 25 floors and is now divided into tiers based on player level. Memento was the best DPS with her Schrodinger build and she carried me in Abyss, but as the temperature went higher and higher, she just was unable to keep up. Miko on the other hand, not a lot of people know how to use her ult properly and end up just spamming her dashes. Sakura Samsara was MiHoYo's first take on the open world concept and basically Genshin's predecessor. Memorial Arena was also introduced during this patch and I remember practicing Valkyrie Chariot's missile stacking strat for several hours. Judo was introduced and every Theresa battlesuit from then on was basically just a Judo holder since the weapon itself was really broken for its single target damage and crowd control. There's also the introduction of co-op mode and the mentor system, and I didn't really bother with cadets since it's too much of a hassle for me. The game had its first anniversary during this time and the first summer outfits were released. Dorms were also introduced and I honestly enjoyed it for the first few months, but then it became stale. Also, it doesn't help that there's basically no new features added since then. What's missing here are Celestial Hymn and Flame Sakitama. Celestial Hymn was the backbone of physical team for years, that is until Senti was introduced. On the other hand, we have Flame Sakitama, which requires timing to get her attacks right. During this time, a lot of Valkyries were added and Hua is one of my favorites since her battlesuits have some actual complexity in it. Phoenix was the best elemental support during this time, and not shown here are Exhibitor and Shadow Knight. Shadow Knight basically replaced Memento as the DPS for Abyss since she has a lot of damage reduction against bleeding. I actually still had to use Memento during this time since I didn't pull for Shadow Knight. We also have Sixth Serenade, another great DPS for Abyss and Memorial Arena. Aside from that, new summer outfits were introduced which were much more toned down than the previous ones. Now we have the first Herrscher and she basically dominated the game. The Will of the Herrscher animation was released and has been the most viewed video in the official channel ever since. For this version, they made Yuta playable and they also added Himiko's last battlesuit, with Final Lesson being released not long after. A new open world area was introduced, and this was one of my favorites since they gave you the ability to fly across the map. There's also Wotan, who's stuck at 90% forever. More Ita battlesuits were added, and the augment system was introduced, with Blade Strike having the first augment core. The Reaxi replaced Infinity Abyss, which is a good move actually, since clearing 25 floors takes too much time. This also has a bleed mechanic which ramps up, a weather system, and a point system based on clear times. In version 3.0, we had the level cap increase and elves were added to the game. We also had 12-man raids, and I just did this with random people, and it took me ages just to form a party. It wasn't an actual 12-man raid, but instead it was divided into 4 parties challenging different stages simultaneously. Then at the end, we had to fight this boss. The twins were added, and Rosalia and Lilia have a unique mechanic where they can interact with each other during battles. They are basically the predecessors of the Herrscher trio. And another thing was, you can also assign both of them in your bridge. The Quantum type was also introduced with Seal, Sealy, Zile, with this girl being the first Quantum type Valkyrie. Q Singularis was also added, which was a mix of Diraxi and Infinity Abyss. This was also the time for the 2nd anniversary, and they gave out calendars for the year 2020 to players who reached level 84. And this was actually the first time MiHoYo gave out physical prizes to players. This was in 2019, and I received the calendar midway through 2020. So Herrscher of Reason was introduced, and she was one of the first Valkyries to have Elemental Breach. This was a huge game changer in Abyss since enemies' elemental resistance just kept increasing. Herrscher of the Void Summer Skin was also released, and there were a lot of issues regarding this outfit in the Chinese server. So this was the case of Ilmali, a high school student who spent a lot of cash on the winter skin. When the summer skin got introduced, he got really salty since it was free and reported the skin to the authorities because it was inappropriate, quote-unquote. The skin still got released, but they changed Herrscher of the Void's camera angles on her victory pose. During these versions, we had pre-arms, and I forged Frozen Naraka in the hopes that Memento will be back in the meta. Mag Typhoon actually made Lightning Empress a viable DPS for a while before Accipiter's Augment was introduced. Hawk of the Fog was the best Lightning DPS, that is until Herrscher of Thunder. We also have Stygian Nymph, and no one uses her right now. Now I have Dark Bolt Jonin, and I didn't play her that much since I already have Accipiter. We also have Azure Imperia, and everyone knows her since she has been the best elemental support for the past 3 years. So for 3.8, Durandal finally became playable, and I wasn't really able to play a post-Honkai Odyssey since my phone just can't handle it. Okay, so Biki was introduced, and she was basically MiHoYo's golden goose. Since a patch after, they added Starlit Astrologos, which is her dedicated support, and Abyss Flower several patches after, which made her relevant again. And yes, I'm very salty since I didn't pull for her initially. Anyway, we have Honkai Kingdoms and The Day You Vanished with the Stars, also known as the best event. When this trailer dropped and this song started, holy fuck, I was absolutely blown away. For context, the song used here is Honkai Sekai no Utahime, and it was Mei's theme song back in Guns Girl. And this song has been actually out there since 2011, so it's been more than a decade. Next is Fallen Rosemary, the first dedicated lightning support, and she has one of the best animations in the game. Her equipment was free to some extent, so most whales and dolphins had her full set. Her pre-arm arrived several versions after in 4.9, which fixed a lot of her issues. Super String Dimension was added, and that's basically what we have right now for almost 3 years already. Rosalia's Augment Core was added, as well as Dea Ankara. This was also the game's 3rd anniversary, and we had an in-game raffle. By 4.5, the game had its first actual collab with Evangelion. Asuka is the first true limited character, along with her collab equipment. Bronya also has her outfit with 2 variations, and they also decided to wake up Wotan during this collab. In 4.6, we have Senti, who replaced Celestial Hymn as the backbone of the physical teams. She basically supports the team by killing the enemies. Oh, and this version is very controversial because of things that spiraled out of control. Moving on, we have Haxor Bunny, the first dedicated eye support, and Nyx, who went out of meta just a couple patches after. Really tragic. 4.9 had the second in-game collab, and this time it's with Genshin Impact. Fischl became playable and was almost always used in Lightning teams since then. Keqing, on the other hand, was only playable during the event. This version introduced Herrscher Flame Scion, the Valkyrie that keeps juggling enemies mid-air. Elysian Realm was also introduced to a certain extent, but it was bare bones during this version. So now, ER can finally go up to 150 difficulty, which is basically finality. And this was also the first time I posted some of my runs on YouTube. ER was difficult back then since when you die, you can't restart the stage and we only had the basic signets. The Mobius Signet strat hasn't been nerfed yet, and this was basically the only way to clear higher difficulties if you're undergeared due to its infinite scaling. I posted my run with Elysia to demonstrate this point since I didn't have any of her signature gears back then. And again, since pre-nerf Mobius Signets had infinite scaling, this made 2 billion hits possible. But in 5.4, they nerfed Mobius Signets into what we have currently. During this time, they also introduced Infinite Ouroboros, and she became the queen of ER for several patches. We also have the Spoke Apocalypse, with Otto being the best villain the game ever had. The game was on its 4th anniversary, and they gave out snack boxes, held an online concert, and HOYO Fest in select countries. 5.4 to 5.6 was a tough time because of the triple S rank release, and I personally had to skip Bronya for Durandal and Rita. A post-Honkai Odyssey Part 2 was introduced, and the rest of the Flame Chasers were teased during this time. ER was also constantly getting updated with new Valkyries and the second set of core signets. All of the Flame Chasers are now playable, and our wallets were drained because 3 of them were supports, and we are playing Support Impact 3. Summer outfits were also added, and we have Elysium Everlasting, basically Amogus. New signets were also added to ER during this time because of the 3rd chapter. Now we have Herrscher of Human Ego, the queen of ER, and everyone knows who she is. And actually before this patch, HOYO also held another concert entitled Dreamy Euphony featuring all captains. So we're nearing the end. Sushin was released and the game had its 5th anniversary. Art books were given, and HOYO Fest was also held this year. Ai-chan, who started as an April Fool's joke, actually got released as a fire support. We also went and explored the moon as part of the Project Stigma storyline. And finally, we're back to the trio, each having their new Hersher forms.
HONKAIサード第1部の物語はこれで終わりを迎えた。私たちの未来は続いていくし、いつか再び交わる日もやってくる。でも今は新しい物語を迎えるための準備をする時だよ。たとえ何があっても、館長が過去を振り返った時、私たちはここにいる。これからの未来はみんなで紡いでいこう。
That's basically the end of part 1 after almost 6 years.